Right, comrades, I'd like to welcome everybody to this discussion on the 40th anniversary of the miners' strike in Britain. Even today, I think there are many lessons that can be learned from the strike. I think the position was one that there had been unrest within the coal industry for a number of years, and the miners' strike, to my mind, was triggered by, and John will go into it in lead off, by the unilateral closure of Corton Wood Colliery in Yorkshire, which was, if you like, tearing up of a national agreement. Because my understanding was that there was an agreement as to the procedure that would take place for the closure of pits. It was based on a mixture of geology and finance, but I think it was heavily based on geology. Were there coal reserves there, and could they be easily mined? And if you like, the strike had a number of years in preparation. It wasn't just an aberration of Thatcher to suddenly decide to tear up a national agreement. Part of that preparation was the hiring of Ian McGregor as the chair of the coal board. Was also the fact that there was huge stockpiles built up, because Thatcher, I think, realised that any miners' strike, given the solidarity in the mine working, in the NUM, was going to be a long one. It wasn't going to be over in a couple of weeks. And also, there was a whole layer of, if you like, preparations. And then I think John will go into the details, but I think the fact that there was a huge amount of solidarity within the working class, not necessarily within the TUC, but within the working class in support of the miners. And then the fact that Scargill had spelt out quite clearly there was a viable place for coal in the British energy market, that I think I was at one meeting where Arthur Scargill spoke, and he said if a fraction of the money had been spent on developing clean coal that had been spent on nuclear power, then there would have been, a viable coal industry, a clean coal industry. So I'll leave it at that for now. And I'll ask John if he can lead off. What, 25, 30 minutes, John?
I'm going to, I don't know how long it'll take. Thanks, John. I want to apologise first. I've got loads of pictures. I've got 2 items of music to share, but I've literally just got back from our Orgreave rally and a film premiere, and with enough time to switch my computer on. I don't have much of a voice left, and and so I'm winging it, basically. Okay, I'm glad you mentioned clean coal, John, because, yeah, we had the proof. It's a viable thing. And if anybody tells you, any of these flat earth eco-fascists, as I call them, that you can't use coal cleanly, you don't even have to burn it. The products you can make from it, it's almost pure carbon. The things you can even things like nylon, things like petroleum are all byproducts of the coal process. So yeah, we could have a viable, cheap energy source that's now sterilised under our pits. And this is an important thing, that when the government of successive governments of both creeds closed pits, they made sure they sterilised forever. Every pit, instead of being maintained, has been allowed to flood. And what you've got is another environmental disaster in the making. Because what they did is they left every item of machinery down there. you've got toxic chemicals, you've got iron that's producing ochre that eventually, and in places is already, where I live now in West Yorkshire, the old Emily Moore pit leaches ochre water, contaminated with iron. The local streams and rivers are brown with that residue, and are dying. And so that's a disaster that's going to happen eventually. And so, you know, I'm glad you mentioned that. As I say, we could be using clean coal. There was a clean coal power station, experimental power station, planned at Hatfield Colliery near Doncaster, and that was closed as late as 2015 by David Cameron, the last act to spite against the miners and our industry. But I want to talk more, because it's called memories. I want to go into some personal memories, if you don't mind, because I lived through it, I experienced it, and I still live through it today. We just this month has been crazy, as has every month since March, which were obviously the 40th anniversary at start of strike. But I must say that the dispute went on longer than a year. The dispute actually started in November, when we went on an all-out overtime that cut coal production by 8 million tonnes a week, and were drastically reducing the coal stocks that the government had been able to pile up. And it's because that overtime ban was so successful that they had to precipitate the strike. They actually had to cause it. They bought, and now there's evidence that proves it in cabinet notes, they actually brought the pit closure programme forward, especially announcing it in South Yorkshire with the closure of Cortonwood, where people had been transferred there 6 weeks previously and guaranteed at least 5 years away. And then they were told no consultation. And you're right, we didn't have an agreed consultation process about closing pits. The NUM had never objected to closing pits on exhaustion, environmental, safety grounds. The only thing we would refuse to tolerate was this so-called uneconomic pits, which only came about because they rigged the market in terms of how we supplied fuel to the central electricity generating board. So because that overtime ban was successful, they triggered the strike at Cortonwood, and we had no other alternative than to support our comrade. Cortonwood immediately responded and said, right, we're going to strike, and we're going to call upon other pits to support us. And it became a rolling strike. And let's kill one myth about the national ballot. The strike was, even under the law, entirely legitimate, because our rules, Rule 41 of the NUM, allows areas, because we weren't a national union, we were a federated union, so areas had the power to call their own strikes. So once Cortonwood started picketing Yorkshire pits, then Yorkshire Area Council declared that strike official. And that's what happened in every area of the coalfield, obviously except Notts and places like Leicestershire. So it were entirely legitimate, it were entirely done under procedure, and the need for a national ballot is just a smoke screen, and it got taken up by scab. And I'm ashamed to say that I was in militant at the time, and people who were so removed from a coal face and a coal field were writing editorials about you should have a ballot, you should have a ballot, you should have a ballot. And it were a smoke screen. And how do you call off a rolling strike to organise a national ballot. It was impossible. So let's kill that one dead. And at our pit, when we got ticketed out, second week at strike, we had the most democratic form of ballot. We had a show of hands to support our Yorkshire comrades. So it rolled on and rolled on. Eventually, we rolled into Nottinghamshire with a great deal of success. We actually picketed the Nottinghamshire coalfield out. People weren't crossing picket lines in any numbers. It wasn't until the iron hand of the state came down and the police, 80,000 police were used in operation throughout our strike. The majority in Nottinghamshire, 80,000, 2/3 of the entire police force of Britain was mobilised in that strike. That's a startling statistic, and that was purely to prevent effective picketing. And that's the backdrop I want to discuss this about, because I am sick to the back teeth of people who know nought, who've only read some learned left-wing academic writing some nonsense about what we should have done, what we didn't do, what we needed to have won. I'm sick of people telling me that. You know, when you've had your head smashed in on the picket line, when you've risked your life, as we all did every time we went picketing, then you can lecture me about this. But as I say, this month, I've lost count at number of meetings I've done. As I say, this is my third this weekend alone. And just to be amongst people who fought that fight to the bitter end has been so overwhelming. You know, I've met people who are friends who I never knew before, if that makes sense, because we've got that in common. We've had
Oye, no Harris.
Because everybody's
shut up.
okay.
Right.
Should be
We've
okay
been
now.
lucky. We had our 40th anniversary Orgreave rally yesterday. Thousands attended, and the Orgreave happened on the 18th of June, which is Tuesday, I believe, of next week. And we've commemorated that ever since my campaign, the Orgreave Truth and Justice campaign, were formed. And obviously a key point to the strike. But what we've had is, it's not been about remembering the strike and looking back. It's been a celebration, an absolute joyous celebration of people who put up the fight of their lives and would do it again at the drop of a hat. And I've seen people, the most hardened people who faced down armed riot police, crying over the last few weeks. The emotions are still that raw. And we've had the honour of having the greatest trade union leader this country has ever seen or ever will see, in my opinion, Arthur Scargill, at the age of 86, addressing us. And he's not got the power he had, but he's still as good and still communicates it effectively, just as he did 40 years ago. And he's actually been able to dispel many of the myths about the strategies, particular about the mass police riot at Orgreave. And he points out that on the day that the police ran rampant, we actually succeeded. We closed the coke works that day. And he's got the document from Haslam, chairman of British Steel, to prove it. So it weren't a rout. It were actually some sort of victory. And what it did it enables us now to point out just what was done to us. I mean, I got injured early on in the strike, quite severely. You know, there's not like having your head bashed in to bring a mixture of emotions, and I want to just talk about that because we can be as heroic as we like. We can, you know, have all the bravado, all the adrenaline, and pretend that's all. But you know, it was a scary time. We had 2 pickets murdered on the picket line. We faced violence that we'd never seen before. You know, we were dressed. It were the days when you had nice summers and things like that. You know, you were dressed in t-shirts and you were being battered beyond belief. And you know, when you're lying in a police cell with severe concussion and you don't know if you're going to go home the next day, you don't know when you're going to see your family. That's quite a sobering thing. And now I'm prepared to admit it was scary. It was scary. You know, you appeared in court and you didn't know what was going to happen to you. You didn't know if you were going to be sent away. You didn't know if you were going to be free. You didn't know what was going to happen to you. And as I say, the ultimate fear was that you might get killed, like our 2 comrades on them picket lines. Now, if that sounds extreme, it's not. It's a reality. And I think to some extent, a lot of us still live with what's now known as PTSD from that period. As I say, I've seen grown men crying their hearts out this weekend. People who were jailed, the people who particularly faced that trial at Orgreave, who faced riot, carried a life imprisonment. They had over a year on bail, waiting to be tried, not knowing what was going to happen to them, and they went to court in September of.
ഞാൻ കോരി കഴിച്ചോളാം
19
കുറച്ച് മാറ്റി
Hey, comrades,
നിങ്ങൾ പിന്നെ കിടക്കണം കേടാ അങ്ങോട്ട് പിന്നെ എന്തിനു പിന്നെ
can everybody mute themselves, please, comrades? I'm trying to mute people as interruptions come, but please, comrades, all try to cooperate. Carry on, John.
Yeah, so all I can suggest in terms of if you want to experience some of them emotions, get up to the Durham Gala, July 13th next month. We had tremendous support, and I want to thank if anybody were here involved in that. I want to thank them because we couldn't have done it with the support we had. We're abandoned, particularly by TUC, by leadership at Labour Party, by Super Scam Kinnock in particular. And when people say, you know, the defeat of the miners, that's bollocks, to use mining language, to be honest. We weren't defeated because we're still here. We're still marching proudly around our communities. The strike might have been defeated, but I want people just to think about this. In this day and age, you have half a day strike here, a day strike there, a few days, then a break, and then again, and then another day, that eventually run a momentum. And I've had the most ridiculous thing. I've been on a picket line of 2 hours, a 2-hour strike, you know. How nonsensical is that? So in this day and age, to do it for a whole year and to experience the hunger, the poverty, the worry, the times of despair, and as I say, just continue that, I think is a victory in itself. And I think that's what people don't concentrate on. Some of our worst enemies are the so-called left. Like I say, the people who want to criticise front sidelines, you know, the paper sellers, the book writers, and the cults of various sects and that. But we did it, and I think that's what should be concentrated on, because we didn't do it because we planned it. We did it because we had to. The government were obviously ready. People should all know about the Ridley report commissioned after we bought the government down in '74. And I've actually seen this weekend cabinet papers where Thatcher has emphasised that we cannot have another Saltley where we won a magnificent victory with the help of all the unions in '72. We definitely cannot lose this dispute, or the government will once again fall. And they've put that in writing, and it's been proven to, quite recently that can I recommend some books that actually tell the story. There's an excellent one by Morag Livingston and Matt Foote, son of Paul Foote, about various injustices. It's called Charged, I believe. I can recommend that because the model that they used for us in terms of policing, in terms of using the courts, in terms of the propaganda, were obviously extended into other areas, and has been and got used in sort of the blacklist scandals, the spy corps, other things, and most importantly of all, the tactics they learned to use against us were part of the Hillsborough cover-up. When innocent football fans were killed by police negligence. But as I say, it's been a time of great pride. I'm trying to write a book about it, about my soul experience. And I have to say, it's the hardest thing I've ever done. It brings emotions that I thought I'd contained and locked away. And, writing about a personal, I find it's the hardest thing to do. So whether I ever finish it or not, I don't know. But I always say we're still here. Thatcher's dead and we're still fighting on. We've got other battles, because one of the most important ones we've got now is the pension theft from the mine workers pension scheme. At the time of privatisation of the industry, no private company wants ever to take over a pension scheme. So the government steps in and underwrites it. And in return, they usually take a 10% commission out of it for guaranteeing that pension scheme. Now, in our case, class war reparations came into being, and the government insisted on a 50% underwriting charge. So every profit, if you can use that word, that our pension scheme makes, the government nicks 50% of it. And it's out of that we should be paid. So instead of spending that money in our communities, most of which are now as dead as the dodo, instead of helping keep them alive, keeping local shops and everything going, it goes into government coffers. And like everybody's tax pounds, it flows uphill to the rich. It's given away in the forms of tax concessions to business. It's used to fund, and this is the most scandalous thing to me, it's used to fund them weapons killing people in Israel. And it's used to fund the weapons that we're giving to Nazis in Ukraine. And that breaks my heart. So that's perhaps next battle. What I want is other people's experience. I'm sorry I've waffled, I didn't have time to prepare up. I'm going to recommend a film that was on general release on Tuesday. It's a documentary. It's the best one I've ever seen. And if anybody tells you it had me in tears, the 2 occasions I watched it, it were hay fever. That's my line, and I'm sticking to it. It's called Strike an Uncivil War, and it's made by the same people who made the groundbreaking Hillsborough documentary that led to the breakthrough. So we're hoping it leads to something for us. And I'll finish on this. People are praising this pledge from the party formerly known as Labour to have a full investigation or inquiry into what happened at Orgreave. And everybody's saying, yeah. You know, now that's down purely to the success of our campaign. A handful of us have done that on our own. The NUM has not supported us one bit, even though they're taking credit for it. The NUM is not what it once was. I'll leave that at that. But, you know, that party has an habit, doesn't it, of reneging on its promises. And are you going to tell me that a party led by a Knight of the Realm, the former director of public prosecutions, is going to expose a government cover-up, a government that were complicit in planning every step along the way their response to that strike, a government that instructed the police to get violent, that instructed the courts to frame us? Can I have much faith in that? I'll be honest, I don't. And as for the word investigation, that's what worries me most. I don't want an investigation. I want a full independent inquiry into, one, the matters of Orgreave, but we broadened that, our campaign. We think that if we get an inquiry and can expose what happened at Orgreave, it shines a light on everything that happened that whole year. Because we had police riots. Imagine this, you live in a little mining village of a few hundred people, and one morning you get up and there's 2,000 police to escort one scab into work, and they're going to smash anybody who tries to stop them. And imagine a mounted police charge down a narrow mining village street where you can't get out of the way and things like that. So we want all that exposing. We want the police manual, and the Orgreave trial collapsed because a witness inadvertently said, one of the police, that they were acting in accordance with a manual. And the lawyers said, what manual? And it turns out there was a secret manual drawn up at the highest levels of the Home Office that enabled the police to do anything they wanted, and actually uses the phrase incapacitate pickets. So, yeah, a bit of a waffle. I accept and I apologise for that, but I think I'm one of the luckiest people on earth. I get to do this sort of thing regular. I meet fantastic people, the best class fighters this country's ever seen. We had the best leadership any union could ever have. Not even the great Arthur, but the equally great Peter Heathfield and Mick McGackie. We were blessed, and with a little bit more, we could have won, and we should never have gone back when we did, just because certain area leaders panicked. So I'll leave it at that, and if anybody has got any questions or point, and apologising again for it being a bit all over the place. And I'll be honest, I'm quite emotional after this weekend.
Okay, thank you very much, John. I know, as personally, I'd have to say that I wouldn't mind seeing more wafflers, if that's a waffle, because quite frankly, I think I've been involved myself in a strike that only lasted 6 weeks, and that was against compulsory redundancies. And we ended up, it was in 1991, we ended up going back to work because basically we had 4 unions on the site I was working, and all of them had voted overwhelmingly for strike action against compulsory redundancies. But what scuppered us in the end was the fact that our union executives basically told us, oh, you've done a good job. The miners were defeated. What can you expect? You're best going back to work with your heads held high, you know, and basically they threatened to withdraw support from our strike. So, I mean, in a very minor way, I've seen it. Just on a personal note, when the strike was called, and I always understood the strike had started with Cottonwood, the factory I worked in, we had a mass meeting of the shop floor workers and agreed on a levy that would, you know, every worker in the factory would support. And I think that there was a lot of organisation went in at, if you like, grassroots level to support the mine workers, because I was in the AUEW, the engineering union, and the levy that we had in our factory went to 2 pits. One was Sutton Manor in St Helens, and the other was the Point of Ayr in North Wales. So I think in an area like Manchester, which had a big engineering, if you like, workforce at that time, all the factories will have had their own levies, and the levies would have been, if you like, shared out, you know, among various mines. And again, you know, that would have been coordinated with, you know, if you like, the NUM. At what level, I'm not certain, because I wasn't, you know, if you like, that high up. But I know our factory was religious in the collections they made and in the connections they made to those pits. So I'll leave it at that for now. Is anybody, there's no indication of comrades wanting to come in? Or is there? Oh, Matthew.
Finn and Matthew have their hands up.
Finn first, and then Matthew, and then Harris. Is of that right? I've got cataracts, so I'm a bit blind. Harris. That's it. Yeah. So over to you, Finn.
Okay, comrades. The first point I want to make is that it's a privilege to be at a meeting that John Dunn is speaking at, and the manner in which he spoke and the examples he gave of his personal experiences of the miners' strike are very inspiring. And this, what we're having today, this discussion, should be far, far wider. Far more people should hear the experiences of trade union leaders such as John himself and the inspiration they have provided for so many other workers, not just across Britain, but also in Ireland. And that's what I want to refer to here. There was a huge support in Ireland for the miners' strike. Several miners came to Ireland and were brought on tours of the country to do speaking engagements, explaining the processes that they were going through over there. Also, the funds of the miners' union, in order to protect them from sequestration by Thatcher's government, were brought to Dublin and were held here out of reach of the Thatcher government. One of the people involved in the processes then was a man called Des Bonas, and he was in what was then the Transport Union, but now Unite. He died some years ago, and we had a commemoration on the Dublin Trades Council, which he was involved with. And Arthur Scargill came over to the commemoration and spoke, you know, in tribute to Des. The Dublin Trades Council, which is the organisation I'm principally involved with, invited Arthur Scargill to address a public meeting in Dublin, which is very well attended and showed tremendous enthusiasm. After the meeting, we went to a restaurant just to have a meal with Arthur, and the amount of people who came up to the table to shake his hand, because they recognized him obviously from the media and so on. So it was going on all night, people just walking up and saying, I wanted to shake your hand and all the rest of it. And it was great to observe that process. And that inspiration, I just wanted to mention that, which John referred to, and the great leadership went beyond Britain and had an effect also in this country and the wide support for the miners still continues. People still speak fondly about that strike, about Arthur Scargill, and I'm glad that John also mentioned Mick McGahey and other great leaders of the movement as well, because it's sometimes presented as some eccentric one-man band. Arthur Scargill kind of went off the rails, which is absolute rubbish. And I was interested to hear about John explain the way in which the strike developed as well, and this argument about the ballot and this kind of nonsense, which is really an attack on Scargill and an attack on union activities in reality. So, like I said at the beginning, I consider it to be a privilege to hear John speaking about the miners' strike in the way in which he did. And I just wanted to add a few things about the effect it had in Dublin, and in particular, the reception that Arthur Scargill got when he made that visit to the Trades Council here, and when he spoke at a meeting here, a very well attended meeting in Dublin at that time.
John.
Do you want me to come in bit by bit or take a few or what?
Take a few at a time, John, I think might be the best thing. Right, is it Matthew next?
Yeah, hi. No, thanks, comrade. No, I spent a year doing solidarity work for the strike on the miners' picket line, and also I was at the time living in Coventry. When the class response was really, I mean, unparalleled, never seen anything like it. And you know, and it represented, I mean, it went far beyond merely an issue of mining. It was clearly, you know, Thatcher attempting to break the organisations of the working class in this country. It was clearly understood by people as that, you know, you know, if you look at the Ridley plan, that's how they saw it, you know, that they had to take on, you know, they took on the unions one by one, and the end result was to try and take on the NUM when they were ready to do so. And so you can go through all the strikes, you know, starting obviously with the steel strike in 1980, and they went through all the different bits. But their aim was always, you know, after the bringing down of Heath, 73, 74, their aim was always a second go round against the NUM as the main, you know, battalion, you know, the Praetorian Guard, if you like, of the British working class. And the working class itself understood that too. And the point being, really, if you look at what happened in Saltley Gate, the question really was always, could it go beyond the miners? And the point, you know, the point of the Saltley Gate, of course, is it did. You know, it was what brought down Heath. And what stopped the trucks going to Saltley Gate was the strike by the engineers, and the fact, you know, numbers of people I knew, unfortunately all of them are dead now, were present, you know, watching this thing in '72 with the engineers marching over the hill, literally their banners coming down the hill, and the cops panicking and shutting the gate. It's all, you know, it's almost sort of completely symbolic. You know, the government falls at that point because they've lost. You know, they couldn't maintain that works, and it was also, of course, I mean, the key, you know, the appeal to the engineers' union, the fact the engineers' union responded, of course, also raised the whole question again, as had been raised previously with Midland Coal Storage and the Dockers strike in '71 of a general strike. You know, whether that was called by the TUC and or you know. Emerged from solidarity, and you know, if you go through it, I mean, you look at the thing, you know, I mean, obviously, I agree with John in terms of ballots and so on, and obviously there's a whole story of that. I mean, it's entirely a creation of the bourgeoisie in order to prevent the momentum of a strike. I mean, you know, there's obviously, you know, serial dispute through the NUM through the years. I mean, historically, I believe you had to get a 55% majority to actually have a strike, which is ridiculous. You know, and there was all this sort of argument within the rule book of the NUM, which is an immense and storied piece of literature itself. But the point being, of course, obviously that strikes don't operate on that basis. They operate on the basis of a momentum and in terms of an organisation class and a class response. And in fact, what you saw, going through, say, to the 81 strike, and the interesting was the 81 strike, where, of course, the government pulled out. There was a strike, but they pulled out because of the response. But there was then obviously the disappointment of the miners in South Wales as a response of the rest of the country. And then, of course, we moved towards saying we want to have a balance. Which is, as I say, fair enough in terms of a tactic. The point being also, it's
Matthew, do you want to bring your remarks to a close at this time?
I think the core thing really is to say that to win the miners' strike, the question was how was it extended beyond the miners? And there were several points at which that could have been done, and they were all denied. And the problem is that, of course, the Scargill and so on did not take that up. That I think we have to be critical of the leadership of the NUM, and you can certainly be critical in Scotland of McGahey, because McGahey signed a whole series of pit closures. They actually tried to get the strike started in Scotland by closing pits here, and McGahey signed for those closures. Whether that was Cardowan in Steps or Kinneil in Fife, in which the workers actually wanted to fight. And were told that by the union essentially, no, we ain't going to do that. And in fact,
Matthew,
you say that.
Matthew, do you want to draw your remarks to a close at this time and then come back later?
Right.
Is there other comrades want to come in? Okay. Right. Is it Harris?
Yeah, it's Harris indeed. Yeah. So thanks. So I'm a lot younger. I was born in 1983, and I didn't grow up in England or the UK. So I didn't experience the strikes firsthand, or I started getting involved or reading or whatever like much later. But so my question, so also thanks John for this. It was very enlightening. What I wanted to ask is, 2 or 3 times during your talk, you talked about nonsense or almost nonsense writing coming from leftist intellectuals or leftist others. And I was wondering, how dangerous this is, how we can avoid it, whether there can be any unity, whether criticism is good or, under what conditions, and things like that. That would be my question. Because I was struck, because maybe it might be a wider symptom of, of the European left right now, that we've gotten too intellectual and we're we've got too harsh on each other, criticizing each other. And, maybe that's a problem of the left for the last 20 years or something. So I wanted your thoughts on this. With your, with your specific experience in all these years fighting for what you saw and trying to guard against nonsense of all sorts. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Harris. I'll call you in after the next speaker, John. So the next speaker is Dan Morgan. So it's over to you, Dan.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, well, I can hear you, but you're a bit garbled.
It's
that's clear.
Maybe a poor signal I have. Maybe I'll speak slowly. I'm not alone. I was in Nottinghamshire during the strike, and as the speaker said, it was a tremendously emotional experience. I want to point out another aspect of the way that the government prepared for the strike, possibly not actively, but certainly one of the aspects was the fact that the leadership, the main 3 leaders of the Nottinghamshire miners, were definitely against the strike, they were traitors to their class. I had the dubious pleasure of meeting one of them, Roy Link, who was the sort of one of the leaders, acting as an interpreter for visiting foreign delegations of mine shortly before the strike. And at one stage he said he expressed admiration for Spencer, who had also led a breakaway union after the 1926 general strike. So there was some sort of tradition in Nottinghamshire. Maybe that wasn't so important, but it was important that in the 1970s, as part of the settlement of the 74 strike, leading into the 80s, many of the mines in Nottinghamshire were very favoured geologically. They had big seams. I visited a couple of them, and working conditions were not too bad. And the bonuses that people were earning were amazing. This was a capitalist economy, a nationalist industry, and workers in 1976 were earning £400 a week, which was a tremendous salary at that time. So it was not difficult for those leaders to convince the majority of the miners in Nottinghamshire that their jobs were safe, there was nothing to worry about. The miners in Yorkshire who came round to picket them were just a load of troublemakers, and certainly some of the tactics did not help to convince Nottinghamshire miners to come out on strike. Once it did, up to 6,000 of the 31,000 Nottinghamshire miners did come out, and I will take nothing away from their heroism to come out on strike when you had no support at all from your county leadership was tremendous. One of the lessons, or maybe the main lesson, I draw from the strike is the need for unity. Because the fact that you had 25,000 Nottinghamshire miners, plus other smaller coalfields, but Nottinghamshire was the key. The fact that they continued to work was a huge factor in the fact that the strike was defeated. A huge factor. And one of the problems, of course, is the nature of the NUM being a federation. It was not a centralised union, a centralised national union. I think this is what other trade unionists can take away from that example. If you want to win battles in the class struggle, you need unity above all, and you need the ability for a national leadership to lead and to make it easy to get all sections of that union in struggle. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Right, John, it's back to you now. If you can perhaps take up some of the issues that have been raised.
Yeah, I'll pick the main bit. Yeah, I'm glad Finn mentioned Arthur's reception in Dublin, because I've witnessed that again this past few weeks. He's mobbed like a rock star, and when you have the honour of addressing miners' welfare, former striking miners, all in the 60s, who suddenly roll back 40 years when Arthur stands up and starts,
Dan,
here we go.
Dan, can you mute yourself? Thank you. Thanks.
It's spine chilling. And even yesterday, You know, there were kids as young as 7 or 8 having the photos took with him. I got some lads who I know well were begging me to arrange a photo op with him. So, yeah, that's still there. You know, despite all the demonisation, he's still regarded as a hero. On the bit that Harris made about leftist criticism, I don't think at times, we're seeing it in this general election, the so-called left, most of which are about as left as my right arm these days, are the worst enemies. You know, they'll always tell you what you should do. They'll always tell you what you shouldn't do. But when push comes to shove, they're always found waiting. And I do think that a bigger enemy, everybody's worried about the far right. I'm more concerned these days about what I call the neoliberal left, this new liberal trendy left that's emerged, you know, the likes of Navarra Media, Owen Jones, and people not mentioned the 40th anniversary of the strike. I think they're a greater enemy because, unfortunately, they dominate our movement with the, you know, with the death of the industrial unions. And the two important points that came out, I think, were Matthew and Dan's. Now, Matthew, about, you know, you're right about Saltley and class solidarity, closed Saltley, and that, you know, could have happened in 84, 85, and it started doing so. The dockers got bought off. Various unions that were going into strike action were paid off in order not to have a united front against the Tories, to ensure that we stood alone. Now, the question of the general strike crops up a lot. And I'll be honest, the NUM wanted a general strike like we wanted another hole in the head. Because we were brought up, we were trained, we were educated in our schools about the betrayals of 26. Could never forget that. And can you imagine that fat idiot, without fat shaming him, Norman Willis, leading the TUC into mass class action? They would have called it off after a day. And so we knew that we got to keep them at arm's length. And, you know, we did appeal for solid. The big weakness, as Dan says, was Nottinghamshire. And one of the things we came, why should we come out when you can't get your own members out? That were one of the problem we had in Nottinghamshire. And I think we have to look back at the real reasons that Nottinghamshire did what it did. It had a history, especially 26 with the formation of the Spencer. It had a history of betrayal. Nottinghamshire tended to have the better, the richer seams, the bigger seams, and the easier working, which, you know, played a big part. And what's not known is, as part of the planning for this, some years before 84, 85, the National Coal Board had a strategy, especially in the Midlands coalfields, where it's easy to do it, of recruiting people who weren't from a mining background. My pit got stuffed with people whose dads had never worked anywhere near a pit and things like that. Like me, I come from countless generations of miners. My dad were a miner, my granddad were a miner. We can trace us back centuries to throughout mining history. But they broke that by deliberately bringing people in who didn't have that tradition, who weren't likely to have a dad who said, no son of mine will go on strike, etc., etc. So that was one tactic. And what we came up against as well was the dark arts of the state. There's a character called David Hart. Now, a fella called Silver Birch got a lot of publicity running around organising strikes. But David Hart became a conduit for the government. He'd been a private advisor to Thatcher's government. He was a multi-millionaire, and he was given carte blanche to go around setting up, making links with strike breakers, etc. And he was very active in knots, recruiting people to become government agents, if you like. And Dan's right, you know, the people like Link, Prendergast, and things like that became agents of the state. And it eventually led to the breakaway UDM being formed after the strike. Now, the UDM stands for Union of Democratic Miners, which is an absolute laugh, you know. They were formed, even though union funds and trade union law mean that any new union set up has to start from scratch. Judges in 2 courts awarded the UDM all Nottinghamshire NUM's assets. So they had the buildings, the millions, and were given every facility. They then went into work with Coal Board to ensure that leading strikers, people who've been leading the strike in Nottinghamshire, please, and I refuse to refer to Nottinghamshire as a scab area, because I'll tell you, the greatest trade unionists you'll ever find come from Nottinghamshire. That tiny minority who braved everything, who braved the ire of their workmates, who were treated as scum by the very own workmates. One, Froggy Froggatt, if you, the famous documentary made, a drama made about his murder. He was actually murdered about 10 years ago by a scab, shot through the heart with a crossbow. And the scab then claimed he were mentally ill and he were hearing voices, and he's out now. Froggy got killed. He was also beheaded, like with a samurai sword by this fella. So that's what they face. So I'm going to have the honour at the end of the month for addressing these fantastic people. But do you know who was the advisor to the Nottinghamshire NUM on breaking away and forming a new? Does anybody know? Anybody just raise their hands? You know, New Labour's Lord Faulkner, Charlie Faulkner, was a QC at the time, and he was the legal advisor to Roy Link and people in setting up the UDM. He now sits is now a close ally of Starmer. He was the what were he? The top legal man in Blair's government, and he was the man who helped set up the UDM. So, you know, we also have to take into account the bonus scheme in terms of Nottinghamshire and the scabbing. In 2 national ballots, we rejected a bonus scheme. We said we'll have a national one. We don't want a pit by pit one because we knew what piecework would do to solidarity of the union. But Nottinghamshire broke away and decided that they were going to settle for an area, a pit by pit rather, incentive scheme, which then led to them getting, you know, massive bonuses, more than 3-4 times what people working in porcines in Yorkshire and Durham got. And that set the rotting. Then other area leaders said, well, if they're having it, we're having it. And then we started digging our own graves, turning out massive amounts of coal. And you can't blame miners for wanting as much as they can get. You never know if you're going to go to work one day and come home that afternoon or that evening. You know, the dangers of the job. So people would grab it. But all those things were part of a concerted strategy. And when it coming back to Nottinghamshire and the general strike situation, I have to pay tribute to the rail unions. The NUR as it was in those days, and as
Rail unions.
who never ever moved a cobble of coal throughout the entire strike. We'd get a phone call at our strike centre, can you hang a banner over this bridge near from West Houses, which mean nothing to anybody else other than me near us, from that depot there. If you hang a banner over that bridge, our members won't cross it. And they never ever moved a cobble of coal throughout that strike. So we've got to pay testament. And in that sense, we contain Nottinghamshire. But part of the Ridley plan, they knew that might happen. So they got an army of scab lorry drivers recruited from various industries. Some of them were even HGV licenses to break the strike. And, you know, but even that were ineffectual. You know, we still came 4 occasions, we settled that strike on terms favourable to us. And 4 times it got scuppered by Thatcher.
Okay, thank you, John. Is there any other comrades want to come in? At the moment, I can see no hands. No. Yeah, Dominic, Roger.
I just want to say, first of all, it's such an experience to hear the just the account that John has given, and I think we could all listen for a long time to that. And really, that's the point of what I wanted to say, because I'm very, very glad to hear that John is writing a book, and I quite understand the you know, it's a hard thing for him to do because of the factors that he explains, the emotional impacts and so on of what he experienced. But it has to be done. It has, you know, future generations need to know everything about the strike, including the personal experiences of people who are bearing the brunt of all the sacrifice in that strike. And I also wanted, you know, really in connection with that, to say, I think a lot of the comrades here would not know much about the experiences that you had, and the hardships and the you know, the whole experience from your point of view. I don't want to, you know, I don't want to prompt you, but I think it would be good if you could say more about actually your personal experiences. I know that you had a really traumatic experience. If you could talk about what happened in your case, and also maybe just give a description for comrades who don't know about it, comrades from outside of Britain, about what happened at Orgreave as well. So that's all I wanted to say.
Okay, thank you, Roger. Right, Dominic. Or David. Hey, David. David. Oh, sorry, David.
It is really inspiring, you know, to hear a first-hand account, and maybe we're going to hear more. The intense solidarity, the head being bashed, and struggling to be able to, you know, stand up maybe in the cells. It must have been a, you know, horrific experience, but what solidarity and what celebration. Comrades, in Southern Africa, there was a similar movement starting up in the mines, and you know, some of the NUM members actually ended up in South Africa, speaking and helping organize them, including one who now has ended up as the the Prime Minister of South Africa, although he would never acknowledge the link today. But, you know, so there's close links. And there's also, you know, Marcia has wanted to participate in this and learn something from the British strike. She's a leader of the uranium security workers who've been victimized and really struggling at the moment. I just wanted to mention that. She sends her greetings to the meeting, and I'll put in some of the points she's going to make into the chat line. Many thanks. And I just should end on the point, 16th of June, we commemorate the youth uprising in South Africa, and that's celebrated throughout the country too. So it's an interesting combination. Thank you, Comrade.
Okay, thanks, David. You want to come in, Jim? Dominic, come in next. Yeah, I just wanted to sort of broaden it out a little bit, because I think we've got to look at the lessons of the miners' strike, and particularly the role of the trade union leadership. Because as my brother was saying about the engineering factories, where as soon as a strike started, there was meetings about how you support them. But the leadership just sat on their hands. Nationally, I think there was a conspiracy not to involve themselves. And I think that is something that's happening today, as far as things are concerned, as far as I see it. Because you've got now left leaders who are refusing to look at taking up political issues. The idea of not being a member of the Labour Party or affiliated to the Labour Party should be followed in a trade union by the fact that you're looking at establishing a Labour movement party to represent the working class. But none of that is taking place. There's very little support for it. And these are sort of, if you like, the harder left. As far as the middle sort of left or right wingers, you know, the idea is not there. And the basic reason for it, as far as I'm concerned, is because they like the status quo. There's no campaign to abolish the anti-union laws because they like that fit, because it gives them a bureaucratic role to play in the labour movement without having to do too much hard work, without having to do much fighting or leading any fights. And I think that's something that we've got to take on board, because John hit it on the head. Are you going to put the TUC in charge of a general strike? We know it happened in 26, it happened today. If you look back to Pentonville, when the 5 dockers were put in prison, there was a rolling general strike taking place. So the TUC were about to take control of it by having a one-day general strike. Because after the one-day general strike, they could have said, that's all, that strike's over now, and we're, you know, go back to work. Don't upset things. And I think these are the real problems that workers are facing today. And it's a question of how we take that on. I think it's excellent that John explains the role that they had against the state and, quite honestly, against the bureaucracy and the Labour Party and the trade union movement. The working class were there to support it, but they needed the lead. They needed the go-ahead. You can't just have one worker saying, I'm going on strike. You've got to do it in a mass organised way, and not just in one factory, but across the piece. So I just thought I'd make those particular points. Okay, thank you, Don. Right, Matthew, do you want to come back?
Yeah, well, Roger asked me to talk about my personal experience on a picket line. One of the reasons I didn't is it's a long and complicated story, but I'll try and summarise it. April the 9th, I was on a picket. Sorry. Totally dried up after this weekend. I was on a picket at Cresswell Colliery, a Derbyshire pit, but historically in Notts, because it dates back to the betrayal of Notts again in 26. They were part of the Spencer Union that got formed then. So it were a Derbyshire pit, but they were in Nottinghamshire NUM. So we had a peaceful picket. There were a good few hundred of us. It one of the biggest we'd had up to that. April the 9th, as I say, which is an important date to me because it shaped my life forever from that very day. The picket had broken up, we'd finished, we were all heading back to our lifts back home, buses, cars, etc., etc. Some people were going for a drink, a nice balmy evening, and I saw a young lad squaring up to a cop, so I just grabbed him and told him to piss off back into picket line. And as I was walking back then, I felt my head explode. And I've been hit. I didn't know, I was just fighting to stay on my feet. From behind, I'm back at Edby, a police truncheon. I was then dragged. We're on a cricket field because every pit had its own sports and social facilities. We're on a cricket field, and I was dragged because I couldn't walk across this picket field and this cricket field, and thrown into a police minibus with other arrested pickets. And I was covered in blood. The copper who done me, his face were actually dripping in my blood. So I was chucked into this wagon, and I felt somewhat warm running down my back. I didn't know whether I put my hand there, absolutely covered in blood. It was pouring out the back of my head. So I alerted sergeant in charge of that minibus and said, what we'll do, we'll take you into ambulance room. Every pit had its own ambulance station and trained medics in it, and they'll deal with you. And I said, I'm not letting a scab touch me. They just walk past me. And he was very compassionate about that. I said, well, you can fucking bleed to death then. And just left me there. The only intervention from my late brother Alan, who, shall we say, were a big lad with a presence and was scared of nobody, who got him to take me to hospital. When I got to Chesterfield Royal Hospital, they found out by this time I should have our senior local councillor from Claycross. They'd obviously found that they'd done somebody who had a bit of a platform that he could use. When I got to hospital A&E, I was taken in, and there were 6 or 8 CID officers waiting, all surrounded police surgeon while they were treating me. And he was so scared of them that he sold me up with anaesthetic, which I'll never forget. He didn't even do a good job of that. His hand was shaking that much. And then I was thrown in a police cell in Chesterfield Police Station. Now, some of us from militant in them days, I remember a comrade called John Dale, an excellent comrade, unfortunately now with the Socialist Party, but a good friend of mine. And he was bought out by my wife at the time. He was a GP, he was a doctor. And he came into the cell and examined me. And he said to the policeman in charge that John's got severe concussion. He's got to be in hospital under constant supervision. And so in response, they called out their own police surgeon who examined me and said, yeah, he's got severe concussion. I'll give him 2 aspirin. But keep him under constant observation. And the constant observation took the form of banging on my cell door, saying, are you still fucking alive in there? And things like that. The next day I appeared in court, still covered in blood, I then found out what I'd been charged with, because nobody had ever told me, nobody had ever read me any rights. I've been charged with threatening behaviour, threatening that police truncheon with the back of my head. And I was put on every picket that got arrested and appeared in court. We were given bail conditions that said you can't go near any pit. Some people had a condition they could picket their own pit. I didn't even have that. I could not go near any NCB property anywhere in the country. As a result, my area, this is the very beginning of the start of the violence. We've now got evidence in Thatcher's own handwriting that she had instructed the police to get violent and this goes back to that police manual, incapacitate pickets. I'll tell you, there's not like severe concussion to incapacitate you for a bit. So I'm on this police bail, and the Derbyshire NUM asked me, could they take out some private summonses in my name? So I, on behalf of them, took out a private summons against the Chief Constable of Derbyshire, because it happened in Derbyshire, the Chief Constable of Nottinghamshire, because they were in charge of policing that day, and the copper, a copper by the name of PC Moss from Blackpool. We sued them three. I was examined by an independent surgeon who said, you know, I've got a bruise shaped a long cylindrical object. He couldn't say it, obviously, it was a truncheon, but he gave a description that matched that. So I were actually sent fundraising and setting up support groups throughout the country. And I suppose that's where I learned the art of public speaking, addressing conferences, addressing support groups. And that's where I witnessed at first hand the magnificent support that we got from rank and file people. To cut it, I say it's a long and complicated story, but eventually I end up in court in September, almost 6 months later. And I find that 2 minutes before I went into to be tried, and it weren't a real trial, you didn't have magistrates, you didn't have a jury, you had a retired judge called a stipendiary who was brought out of retirement to convict minors, nothing else. Again, that's in Thatcher's notes. And in our case, Pickett's being tried that day, they opened up a former magistrate's court that had been shut 3 years and created, if you like, a pop-up court. So 2 minutes before I'm going in to be heard, I get a second summons given to me. No time to prepare for it, no time to even read it. And I find I've been charged with watching and besetting. A charge they'd resurrected, dates back to the 1600s. And when I appear, I mean, normally if you're a picket arrested, you'd appear before a stipendiary. It'd last 2 minutes, you'd be found guilty and sent away. I had a number of witnesses against me because they had to make sure that these private summonses fell. And so they all told conflicting stories about how they recognised me because of the pit floodlights illuminated me long blonde hair, a different shade of blonde, obviously, in them days. And then we proved that the floodlights weren't on at the time I'd been done. So the next one comes in and obviously been told don't mention floodlights, but he could recognise me with long flowing locks, and that went on. They even described the clothing I was wearing. Apparently I was wearing a combat jacket, a camouflage combat jacket. So we produced the little black bomber jacket I'd been wearing, still covered in blood, the funny thing is, the prosecution refused to touch it in case they got a disease off dried blood. And so we disproved everything. And the judge, in his summing up, said he believed everything I said. And I thought, I've cracked it, I'm going on. But I find him guilty. I think he got carried away. Oh, and the most embarrassing thing is one copper said, you've just heard me talk, that I stood at the front of the picket line and incited pickets to attack by shouting the words, "Come on, let's get them chaps." Now, if anybody ever hears me say "oh" like that, then strike me with a truncheon again, I deserve it. And I thought perhaps in the haze of semi-consciousness and over years, I'd somehow invented that in my own head. Until last year, I addressed a meeting up in Middlesbrough, and a Unite secretariat branch there, who'd been a an NUM picket himself, and he'd been arrested, and apparently he used exactly the same phrases. So, you know, it will lie after lie, but I'm still finding it. So the private prosecutions fell because I've been found guilty. In 2018, as part of the process of trying to clear my name, I sent off a freedom of information request about my arrest and my attack. And just remember, this was Derbyshire Constabulary I asked. I tried to sue their chief constable at the time, and I got a lovely letter back within a few days. I sent them the 10 quid that you have to send for a freedom of information request. They sent me back my tenner with a lovely letter saying, thank you. Unfortunately, we can find no record of your arrest. So you tell me how I ended up with 2 criminal convictions and I was never arrested. There's no record of it. And so I can't clear my name. I'm going round and round in circles. I've got 2 criminal convictions that crop up on any search, and got used against me in a subsequent police frame-up that might be the subject of a second book if I ever finish the first. But yeah, tell me how I clear my name. And that's the ludicrousness of it. Now, going on to Orgreave, a mass picket were called because we knew, and this is an important thing, that steel, and Arthur spent ages explaining this, that the stocks at the steelworks of coke that's essential to make steel. So if anybody tells you there's such a thing as green steel, that's not true. You need coke to make it, else it's not viable. They'd only got 6 weeks supply, whereas the power station have got months and months. So if we could stop steel, we bring industry to a close. The car industry would close, construction would close, everything that depended on steel. So that was the concentration. Unfortunately, the steel workers who've gone through something similar were led by a fellow called Sir Bill Sears, who did nothing but undermine the strike from day one. So we didn't get their backing. So Orgreave were part of that. It became the focal point because it was the biggest coke depot in the country at that time. And it were, you know, rail unions weren't moving anything. It had been picketed throughout the strike, no incidents hardly. And then on June the 18th, we called a mass picket. That's when we actually succeeded in closing it because of that mass picket. When our lads got there, I weren't there, I was still on this bail, there were 8,000 police lying in wait for them, with dogs, snarling dogs, long shields that had never ever been used in England. They've been used in Northern Ireland in the Troubles, short shields and mounted officers. And, you know, it were a hot summer's day. Pickets had just gone there for, you know, some of them have said it this weekend. We went for a jolly. You know, it were a hot summer's day. They're playing football, cricket in field. There were no inter-violence, and there were the traditional shove to try and stop the lorries coming in, and then all hell broke loose. The police had orders, which are lost now in the mists of time, to be ready in waiting. We had mounted police chargers in a field. Pickets were chased over a live railway line to escape. You know, it doesn't sound much of you know, a number of horses charging you, but if you think of a horse as a half-ton tank bearing down at you, with an armed copper with a long staff, not a truncheon, people were mowed down, trampled, violence not seen before anywhere since perhaps Peterloo. People indiscriminately being hit. I know people who ended up with fractured skulls, broken arms, broken legs. 95 of them were arrested and 50 were charged with riot that carried a maximum sentence of life imprisonment. And these are the people who I say waited over a year to go to trial. The trial collapsed. Again, it's a long story cutting short. The trial collapsed when defence barristers led by famous people, Gareth Pierce, Michael, Mansfield, asked to see the evidence from the police film. The police had filmed everything from behind their own lines, and it showed that the timeline of people being arrested didn't fit. I arrested this officer arrested Mr. So-and-so at this time. And the police evidence proved that didn't happen. You know, the horse charges were followed by short shield charges that cost people, dragged them back to be arrested. So that was proven. It also proved that the majority of statements, and now some coppers have gone on record saying that when they were writing the reports out, their arrest reports, they were taken into a classroom in a local school and dictated to by a senior detective from South Yorkshire Police. Your statements must contain these words, right? And they were all the same, identical. So the odds on, you know, every copper almost writing this identical phrase were minimal. So they're able to prove that there were perjury committed. And, you know, some coppers have said this is what happened. And one copper, his name is at the bottom of a document, printed, typewritten, not signed, because he did not sign. He said, I'm not signing that. Another one was proven by a police, an independent handwriting to be a forgery. It wasn't and daftest of all, one of the arresting officers allegedly, because you have to have two to witness your arrest. I saw him do that. I saw my colleague arrest him. One of the officers were actually on leave that day and away fishing somewhere, I believe, but managed to arrest somebody at home. So it collapsed after all that time. No copper has ever been charged with perjury. The senior officer in charge, Clements, the Assistant Chief Constable of Nottinghamshire, lied under oath and was proven to have lied under oath and went on to get promoted by the Home Office. So in a nutshell, and I'm sorry it's so long, that's what happened at Orgreave. 95 of my comrades framed, 50 of them likely to go down for the rest of their lives. And, you know, just imagine, and we still have one, a comrade of mine, Arthur Critchlow, who can't talk about it. I've seen him break down when he's been asked to and cry. He's still got PTSD. The scars still vivid on back of his head where his skull were fractured. And that lives with him to this day. That's why we've got them in our campaign, fighting for justice. They've sent off, funnily, their documents are still intact and are still and can still be obtained under a Freedom of Information Act. My mate Kevin Orne sent for his, and it came back, and the only thing you can see is his name. Everything else is redacted. That's how daft it was. And to make sure we'll never know what happened at Orgreave and how the strike were planned, they've now locked documents away, impounded them till 2066 at the earliest, and some until 2071. So it's unlikely any of us, unless I live to be 119, will ever be able to get justice and see what really happened. And I just ask, why would they do that? You know, Why would they want to do that? Why are they scared of that truth coming out? You know, what would happen if people knew that the government planned everything, that the government micromanaged a strike and the police and state reaction from day one? You know, governments might topple. And also, what has to be got across, it's easy, you know, I'm still traumatized, I'm still emotional about what happened to me. Well, you know, when people say you were doomed from the start, if we were doomed from the start, why did they do to us? My partner Beverly came up with this today. I never thought on it, I'm ashamed to say before. Why did they have to do to us what they did to us for a whole year if we were doomed from the start? We could have won. We came so close. And I hope that, you know, we get a chance to do it again. Look, quickly going through the points that David and Dominic made. Yeah, we established links in South Africa. A friend of mine went over secretly to assist the NUM in South Africa, and we had tremendous links with that unit. And in fact, you know, to their meagre starvation wages, they sent a donation to our strike fund that to this day we've never cashed, because we knew, you know, the sacrifices they made in doing it. And, you know, Dominic talked about the supporting engineering workers. Yeah, I know Hatfields in Sheffield went on strike in support on us. Each man paid a levy of 50p a week towards strike fund. And, you know, he talked about breaking away from Labour. I had the honour of opening the Bakers Union conference only last weekend, and they're the first to disassociate from the party formerly known as Labour. Now, on the formation of a new party, I'm a bit hesitant on that. Everybody's saying, oh, Jeremy Corbyn called a new party. Bloody hell, he didn't exactly do great when he was leading Labour Party, keep apologising and being as weak as a babby. So I think that the formation of a new union has to wait until we've rebuilt class solidarity and rebuilt our movement. The trade union movement's still only slightly a little of it. Some unions are growing in membership. My own Unite has had a rapid increase in membership since Sharon Graham took over, and I think they'll be, if they can escape the clutches of the old guard of Steve Turner and crooked lawyers who are in senior positions, then they'll break away, I'm sure.
Okay, thank you, John. Matthew, do you want to come in? I'll let John go on for a long time because I think it was necessary, you know, to really get a flavour of what had happened from somebody who was there. So, Matthew.
Yeah, I mean, the issue here is really about how that strike could be won, and as I say, the core question is twofold. One, could it be extended beyond the miners? I mean, the issue of the TUC is quite clear. I mean, the TUC, we say, you know, and we should say it, is actually run by state agents. That's how it works. And the question is, okay, you need to break that. The other question is of the left. Now, I mean, the thing is, okay, we should be critical of all of the left organisations. None of them come out with a particularly brilliant record. I mean, the SWP, for the likes of the SWP, decided for 6 months they weren't going to bother. You know, you can go through them all and say this, but the question really for the working class is it requires a revolutionary party. I mean, the thing is, you can't just do it on the basis of trade unions. You require a revolutionary party in order to do this. You know, because you require something that actually, you know, takes all these lessons and can apply them to the class struggle in those terms. I mean, the thing is, it's the NUM was quite exceptional in that sense because it did have a real consciousness of its own position and of its own history. You know, and I remember folk would telling me, that to the day when they went back to work, the number of days they've been out in 1926, because that was part of the class memory, and it was like that, in those terms. I mean, obviously, something that isn't the case now. There just isn't that. But that really is the function of the Revolutionary Party. That's what you require. You require a general staff and this political function in order to win these great class battles. Now, the other thing, of course, about the strike, of course, is it shows up precisely the nature of the class system. That it was a war. It exposed all this stuff. The whole thing. Bourgeois. The various forms of bourgeois ideology and control and so on and so forth that usually exist and usually function were all stripped out. And it became the question, as Engels proposed, the bodies of armed men, that they were. It wasn't even just the cops. I mean, they were dressing up the army in police uniforms. And as you say, it was a question of, how does the state apply violence in order to maintain its own rule? I mean, Thatcher's quite clear on that, and it's quite clear to the people. The point is to draw that out, that it is, the nature of capitalism, the capitalist state itself, and it was a class war on the street for a whole year. And clearly, as you say, I mean, the point for the Tories, and of course, not just the Tories, also for the Labour Party, because for Christ's sake, the Labour Party actually serves the ruling class. Kinnock and these people, they weren't, they served the ruling class. That's what these people are. Corbyn made that quite clear. I mean, the one thing about Corbyn, if we say, is he was the only Labour Party leader not to be an open agent of the ruling class. That's why I hated them so much. Quite clear what these people are, and that's exposed by the strike. But the question is, what's the response of the working class? Thanks.
Okay, finish, Matthew. Right. I mean, I don't know if you want to come back, John, or.
Well, just briefly on that, could it have been won? Yes, very near. And like I say, we came close on 4 occasions. The strike were actually settled by agreement, only to have it embargoed by Thatcher herself. You'll remember that the deputies union, who were, the pit supervisors in charge of safety in pits, they had a ballot to supporters and got an 82% majority, and 82% to supporters. Had they come out, the strike would have been over before they'd even walked out, because no pit, Nottinghamshire anyway, could have done it without it. Now then, they're in close touch with Arthur all throughout, and it was being coordinated. Then they mysteriously vanished for a weekend. Nobody can get hold of them. Nobody can track them down. Nobody knows where they are. 2 characters called McNestry and Sampy, president and secretary. And from out of the blue, they suddenly settled for the agreement that had been on offer more or less from day one, that this is what you'll have, this is what you'll get. So nobody knows to this day. None of them will talk about why they called that strike off. My guess is somebody either promised them a load of money, or, I mean, McNestry ended up with a cushy job at heading the Coalfield Regeneration Trust. That is anything other, if you come around the coalfield, see what regeneration means. It means developers can build some housing on former pit land. That's all. I think, as I say, they were either offered a big wedge, or somebody showed them a photo of the family and a gun, and put the fear of death into them. So that will never be known, but that were a serious setback. We still fought on for another 6 months. I don't want to go into any details on the question of a revolutionary party, but I'm sick on it. If you think you can take that Russian model and throw some quotes from Lenin and impose it on the masses of working class, it ain't going to happen. If one does happen, it'll emerge. But I've had, you know, when you talk about these so-called revolutionary parties, the SWP have recently sabotaged Claire Daly's re-election in Ireland, split the vote to make sure she didn't get. They've got a history of splitting the vote against left trade union leaders, and the most laughable one of all, I've had the enjoyable pleasure, along with poking forks in my eyes and scratching my hemorrhoids with razor blades, of looking at some of the new revolutionary communist party, the party formerly known as Socialist and the IMT, the child grooming sect, as I would rather refer to them, because they seem to have a habit of going down that line. They've decided they are now the elite, and what they're going to do, they're not going to lead us to promise land and conquer capitalism. They're going to conquer the masses. Tell me what that means. That's how daft that whole idea is. The idea that there's this elite that's going to descend from the skies because they've read a bit of Marx, Lenin, Engels, and Trotsky, and tell us what we should do. We've seen it, we've had it, it's failed. And so if one happens, it will emerge. It won't be created. It definitely won't be led by the likes of Alan Woods and Rob Sewell and people like that. So if it happens, it happens. But my experience, both in militant and seeing that degenerate and socialist appeal, which the best lesson I learned from socialist appeal weren't any quote of Lenin or Engels or Marx. It would clearly keep the hell away from any of these so-called revolutionary elites. And the idea that the working class has some elite members who you can win over by selling them a paper, and these masses that you need to educate is absolutely ludicrous. Come along to our meetings and get educated yourselves. So, yeah, and sorry it's been a while, like I said.
Okay, John, thanks very much. Right, Roger, I think we'll be drawing the meeting to a close because I think everybody's had their say.
Sick of hearing me.
No, far from it, John.
Well, I
don't
am.
necessarily agree with everything, but yeah, I'm not sick, and it's been a real pleasure to have you speaking today, John, because I think it brings back many memories. I mean, particularly the one you mentioned about Hatfields in Sheffield. The factory I worked in had a similar levy, and as I say, we were twinned with two pits, and we were involved in all sorts of social events. The local Labour Party held all sorts of fundraising activities, you know, for the miners, and that was replicated up and down the country. You know, there was a hell of a lot of support at grassroots level, you know, real support. But unfortunately, when it came, the further up the ladder you got, the weaker the support was. And by the time you got to the top, it was just about sabotage. Any road, on that happy note, I'll ask Roger if he would like to say what might be happening in the next week or two.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Well, comrades will have noticed there's been a lot of elections happening around now, and we have the Euro elections with which are probably, you know, among the most biggest upheavals, if you like, with the victories of far right parties, or at least big upsurge of the far right parties in so many places. We're hoping to actually invite Claire Daly herself to speak and to talk about exactly what happened, why, and also to tell the story that John referred to as to how she becomes, having been a kind of tribune on the social media, and really speaking the most eloquently, the most dramatically on all the main issues of the day, how she's been defenestrated as a result, apparently, of the manoeuvres and intrigues of rival groups. Then there's also the Indian election, where we've seen an unexpected setback for Modi, who was actually assumed to be to achieve a 2/3 majority, which would have given him the right to change the constitution to make it a Hindu communal dictatorship in effect. He got knocked back on that. He didn't even get a majority in the parliament, and we're going to have comrades from India who are going to be speaking about that. We've also got, of course, the French general election, which could be perhaps one of the most important elections in Europe for decades, because on the one hand, there's the danger of in effect, the fascist party, the whatever they call themselves now, that Le Pen's party could form the government, and of course that would open up huge class struggles. But even the possibility was very, very welcome to see that after a long history of sectarian competition and divisions, that the left parties have agreed to form a pact in order to put forward a united front, and there's a possibility that the left parties could win. So very important. So again, we'll have comrades from France to speak about that. Now, as to what's going to be next week, it's not quite clear yet. So please watch this space, so to speak, or watch your emails, and you'll get information soon. But those all of those things that I mentioned, they are coming up in the next few weeks. So please stay tuned. Okay, well, bye everybody. See you next week.
Roger, I'll see if you're going to put this up on and embarrass me about my waffle. Any pictures I was going to use, I'll try and send them to you to use as a preamble to that. And if I can download, trouble is my computer skills and are a bit less than my waffling.
Well, that would be very welcome. That's great, because actually your lead off and your contribution was so picturesque anyway, and it really brought everything to life. But of course, to see the actual images would be very, would really back it up. So thanks, John. Thanks to everybody who came.
Get the last word from the panel.
Okay.
Hi. Okay, no pressure or anything. Yeah, so I think I lost the question. What was it? So I think I had already kind of mentioned what was I saying? One second, I'm trying to find my initial. Yeah. Okay. So in terms of like supporting supporting liberalism and stuff, oh gosh. So I think it's quite overdue now, indeed, that we should stop supporting neoliberal politics. They lead nowhere. Yeah, so I think I was already kind of saying in the chat, but just in case people missed it, I was having a disagreement at one point with someone, and she had told me that she supports Navalny, despite the fact that he's a Nazi, and I'd already told her.
I'm sorry, look, comrade, I'm not quite sure what this is relating to. But the meeting is over now. Sorry, you come, by all means, come next week, please. Okay?
Because Liberals were always